So now we're ready to create a dashboard. Node-RED doesn't have a WYSIWYG editor, so we can't create a dashboard by dragging and dropping graphical items. What we end up doing is putting the elements onto our dashboard and then associating those with either tabs and groups of tabs. So if we try to see what our dashboard was, and we clicked on this icon, we'll find out that there's no nodes. We have to redeploy it. Please add some UI nodes to your flow and redeploy. Well, I'd like to try and get away without doing that. I'll close a few of these tabs just in case they get in the way. But that's it. So we'll go back to here. That's FIAB dev, and we'll see what the minimum we can do. So let's put a new tab in there. Now these tabs are our navigations. We'll put 2 in. We've got 2 of those now. We'll add a group. We'll add a couple of groups. In fact, we'll add a few groups to this tab, and we'll do the same thing to this one. I think I've done 5 there as well. But if we now deploy this, I think we still won't see anything happen. No, we're still there, but there is a concept of adding a spacer to these groups. As soon as we do that, let's add a spacer to each of these groups, we should start to see how these groups exist in space. That will make sense in a second. So that's deployed. Let's have a look at what that is. Okay, great. Now we can see that we have these groups and we have 2 tabs, each with 5 groups. I didn't make a distinction there. They've all got their titles showing. We'll add a 6th potentially to see what happens when we add a 6th, because it looks like maybe 6 will fit across in their initial size. This screen that we're viewing it on is a full HD screen. Let's do that. We'll add a 6th group to this one. So in this tab here we'll add a group, and this one we'll add a group as well. Let's deploy that and refresh that. What happened? Well, I know, because we didn't put any spaces in those groups. These 2 groups have no spaces, so we can't tell what they look like. A spacer is essentially a placeholder, so 1 by 1 placeholder. These groups have a default width. Well, let's look at one of those while we're here. They have a default width of 6, and as we add widgets or things in these groups, they will fill up, and they'll fill up from sort of top left to bottom right, and we'll go. Now let's, for example, just to show that, let's make this spacer a larger spacer, and we'll make it a 6 by 6, and we'll deploy that. So now if we look at the dashboard, we'll see what happened here. So yes, it will only fit 5 across. Tab 2, like that. So we'll only fit 5 across. Now the reason for having them like this is that we can change the width of this deployment, and then as we change the width, it will resize and reorder to fit, so that potentially this will fit a mobile device or a tablet or a full screen. So that's the intention, that's the idea of these groups. And as we fit things into these groups, we can actually start to see how you can create a dashboard. If we look here as well, there's a few things that are sort of essentially global. We've got a theme. We can make the theme to be dark or light. Deploy that and see what that looks like when we refresh that. And we don't need to. It's already done that. So we have the choices. Now let's put a link in. So the difference between a tab and a link. We'll add a link. It's at the bottom. It's HTTP. We'll make it Google. Opening a new tab. This tab on iframe. So we'll say just a new tab. Update. We'll maybe move it up. I think we can do that. So we go tab 1, link 3, and tab 2. Deploy, and let's look at the dashboard. So tab 1, link 3. Okay, we've opened up in a new tab. I understand now it means a browser tab, so we can, let's change that. Let's edit that and see what the effect of open it up in this tab or an iframe. Let's put it in an iframe. It doesn't, let's see if it's, that's going to appear inside our node red. Fair enough. Okay, doesn't like iframes. We've just bumped into a little bit of an interesting one here. We'll edit that. Let's try this tab, see what happens. Update, deploy, dashboard, link 2. We get Google. Let's go back. Okay, that works okay, but we can't stick it in here. We can't put it in an iframe. Let's go back to a darker theme. That was pretty instant. Let's see about putting some things in these groups. Well, before we do that, perhaps we'll maybe make a group 1. We'll make group 1 6, 8. No, what width are we? 6, 12. We'll make that 18 wide, and then we'll see how that affects this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 wide is pretty much, so 30 is going to be the size of a full frame. Well, we'll do 130. We'll make that 30, or even group 630. I don't mind. Let's see if we can keep the order. All right, let's just have an explore on this. So let's have our site. We'll make this group. We'll make it bigger. We'll make it. Okay, we can only make it. I'll make it 30. Well, let's allow it to be collapsed. Let's see if we can actually shrink it down. See what these things do. We can associate with a tab. In fact, we can do that from here. We can actually create new UI tabs rather than from here. We can do it from the properties box. Let's update that. We need to put a, well, let's put a spacer in that is update. Let's change this. Let's edit this spacer. Make it a 1 by. Whatever, some figure. And now we can see we've formed this large collapsible group. If we resize this one, we're going to see that it can't accommodate all of group 1. So I would imagine we'll end up with some type of scroll bar. Okay, possibly group 1, we just lose it. I don't know if we put any data in it. Now group 1, whatever happened to our 1 by 13 spacer? Maybe we should find out what happened there, because that's, is that because we collapsed it? Yes, we did. That's right, I remember now. Let's try changing the size of that. Okay. We can't get to the tab to make it bigger. Let's just see if we can do that. Perhaps we won't be able to, but that shows us some of the limitations of the screens. So if we design a dashboard for a wide screen, we're going to be having a wide screen. If we want to design a dashboard that can be resized, we would pick groups that were smaller. So that's going to show us how to actually create regions. We have a tab region, or we have tabs, individual tabs. We have within the tab itself we have groups. Within the groups we are going to put widgets, and those widgets are going to be the useful things. So right now all we've got is just spacers. So now if we remove the spacers, all the spacers, we would lose the, I think we just lose the group. So if we edit this and delete the spacer, it's essentially a group with nothing in it. Let's see if it's not shows on the dashboard. Yeah, so go group 1, group 3. Okay, no group 2. what can we put in these things? Well, we can put elements in there. There's this 1x13 spacer. If we put a chart in here, and maybe a button, and maybe a text box, we can associate those with different groups. Now at the moment they all have red triangles. They don't have any group property set at all, so we can put them all in, say, group 2, and we do that not by dragging and dropping them, but by editing the properties of the actual things. We can also copy and paste them as well, so that's the other thing we can do with these things. So what text might we want to put in them? What might we want to chart? Well, one thing we could chart would be very simply the data from the MQTT message from the machines. So we might want to switch, instead of switching by payload, we could switch by topic. We can also subscribe to different topics. We don't need to just have a single subscription. In fact, we might do that. Let's make it a bit simpler on ourselves and not bother with a switch. Let's just have 2 different MQTT subscribers. We'll have this one for my factory, my cell, my machine. I think it's my machines. We'll check that. We'll just have those, and we'll copy and paste that, and we'll change that to my RFID reader. I don't know if I'm plural or not. We'll say done. Let's check here on our rules. We have my machine singular. We have my RFID reader singular. So let's make sure that our subscriber is set that way. My machine, my RFID reader, and that's it. So we might, let's say, put our RFID reader text on here. Now the only difference is that the payload is going to be what we want. We are actually just looking at putting the payload information in there, and that's essentially going to be the RFID reader only. So it's not to throw away a few bits of information just to sort of show it, just to see if we can show it on the dashboard. The my cell, my machine, again, we can really, I think what we can chart is the data on there again. We will be doing a switch, but actually, sorry, no, it's going to be a not a switch. Let's delete the switch, but we can keep the payload. Change, we're going to set the message payload just to be something simple, and it's just going to be the payload. I'm going to change the payload. Okay, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I know already about the chart object. The chart object requires the payload value to be converted to a number. So what we can do is we can change, we can say multiple series can be stored on the same chart by using a different message topic value on each of the input messages. Well, that's quite interesting. So they actually do have a different message topic on each of the input messages. Multiple bars on the same chart. So okay, well, we know that there's going to be different topics, because the topic will be my factory, my cell, my machine, and then it will be the different topic name. But if we just adjust the payload here to be, the payload turns into payload 1, we will just drop the time. Now the chart itself has still got a red triangle on it. Well, I guess that's because it's not been given a group. So let's put this chart in tab 1, in group 1, and we'll let it be an auto sized one, so it might actually fill up the entire thing. We can change the different types of chart. Line chart will be reasonable, and we can do something like this. We can make a step one, which is going to, we'll do that. We have a time on that, last hour, last 1,000 points. Maybe we'll go for last 10 minutes. and we'll put this line chart on there because we actually have quite quick duration dummy cycle times at the moment. We'll say machine data. Now that we maybe would have a filter where we're only going to plot data that is between 0 and 1, but that's okay. We'll leave it as it is. We'll see what it does. Now the output. What do we use the output for on this node? Inputting a message payload containing a blank array will clear the chart. Well, we can actually inject a clear. We might have a button to do that. We'll maybe do that with a button. As these aren't associated with anything. Well, let's call this button. It's got call button. We'll put it in there. We'll put it in tab group 1, and we'll put this one in tab group 1 too as well. Tab group 1 value format message payload. So this one we could potentially set the payload to be the topic, but we'll know that anyway because it'll be on the group. So let's just associate with the group. It's done. That one will do, and let's deploy this. So I keep forgetting I have this collapse. So okay, we've got this great big gap here. Now that's because of this spacer. We have raw machine data down here. We have a button that's the full width of the thing. We have some text. So how could we make that button narrower? Well, we could add a spacer, I'm guessing, because I'm guessing these things automatically fill to fit the screen. So let's get rid of this 1:13 spacer down the side. Let's move it down actually. And let's maybe change that one to be 1:4:1. That'll do. See what it has. See what effect it has on our button. Deploy that one. Let's see what the button does. A button have a width? It's got an automatic size. Okay, so if we'll have it as auto, I'm guessing that if we look at the information for the button, auto will actually say it'll fill up. The default size, the UI button defaults to 3:1, 3 wide. Okay, so it definitely wasn't 3 wide. It filled up the whole thing. So was it done for that? Well, let's see what goes on here. So now we have, go back to our dashboard. We've got the graph to start off with. We have a spacer. We have a button and we have text. Perhaps we would want to see if let's get 2 machines running as well. So let's look at the dashboard now. It's been deployed, so it's filled up the entire area that we applied for it. We've got time along the bottom. Okay, if we hover over it, we'll see it's called My Factory My Cell Machine E2421. So that's the value, I'm guessing, and then that's going to be, this one's going to hover over. If we hover over that, we might see that it went to 0 somewhere. Okay, we're just getting the state changes. Okay, we get when it comes down here. So these are the right. This I'll need to be clear here what's going on. Why have we got a square wave showing? Let's just make a look at this. So the graph that we've picked, we've given it this step interpolation. Originally it was linear, so let's apply that and deploy that, and we'll see the actual points that exist. So here we go. Now this goes from 0 to 1 and then down to 0 again, and then at the process interval, which is roughly 10 seconds for these default ones, it goes back to 1. But you don't see, but because the dots are being joined together, it would be nice to see the transitions. So for data like this, where we have what essentially is events happening, we want to see the events, and the way to see the events is to simply make this graph give us the step, because otherwise if we have to try and do the step, we have to put in points, we have to create an extra point that doesn't exist. So what's going on here when we deploy that, and I'm going to reach over and turn on the other machine, so hopefully we'll have 2 traces in a minute or two, and look at the dashboard here, we will see that the real data point is this one, and then there isn't a real data point down here, it's actually up here. So the data points are exactly as they were, and we only get a indication of what graph it was when we see the data point. And here we are joined by the other machine. We don't see a key on the side. We can still scroll up and get rid of it. In fact, we can't tell if there's anything in there. We could put a title in this possibly, but right now when it's collapsed, it's not much use to us. So we're starting to see, did we see 2 graphs? It's potentially hard to tell them apart, isn't it, if we have 2 on one graph. So how would we fix that? Well, let's maybe, instead of having 2 on one graph, we'll create another graph and put them down here. And we don't really want them to be that big. Now, we also have another position that we haven't plotted yet, because that's been 0 and 1. We haven't actually stopped these machines yet. We haven't got that stopped position. So if I include a stop, we see that it went up to, well, 11. That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's actually turning what is the binary digit into an equivalent decimal number. You know, if it's 1 1, it looks like 11, and so it's taken that as our step. If anything, we want to not let that happen. We want to try and just have our 0s and 1s plotted, or possibly even our third state as even 3, or even reversing it. So we have, because of course this is reverse logic, isn't it? So the narrow gaps here when it's high, this is when it's idle. These are our idle times, and this is our busy period. So it's busy for between here and here, roughly 26, 36, 10 seconds, and a period of about 48 to 52 seconds, so 10 seconds and 2 seconds. So that's our default busy and idle times for our machine, our simulated machines. We can see here that this one actually had an alarm for a certain amount of time. Let's also make a note of something here, that really the cycle time is this period when it's going from one state to the same state again, so 12 seconds. That's where we see our 12-second cycle time occurring between these 2 points. So the rising edge to the next rising edge, or we can think of it as the falling edge to the next falling edge. Same thing, 26 to 38, so 12 seconds. Falling edge to falling edge, or rising edge to rising edge. And that's how we'll work out our cycle times. And that's what we need to add up. Now, this isn't like taking temperature data, and that's why this is a slightly more difficult thing to save, to capture. We're not looking at, we have to actually do something about this. This is what's going on in our events. We have to be able to deal with these cycles by looking for parts in this curve that actually allow us to create times for events. Or the cycle time is essentially from one similar event to the next similar event, and that's what we want to be able to plot. What haven't we got here? Our button is still massively wide. We didn't get rid of our button. I think the spacer is here and the button has stayed that width. So perhaps the buttons don't have that default width. Let's do 2 things. We have a message payload there. We want to switch by we've done the payload. The topic's going to be maintained here. We'll potentially keep the two results. We'll switch by topic. Route messages based on their property values or sequence position, so we'll stick a switch in there. It doesn't stuck. Has now. So we need to switch by topic. We got message, topic, message topic. We know that one topic. Well, we could even do payload. We could even split. Well, let's. What I'm trying to do is not split. Is split by different things, where we don't have to look at the database. We know the topic has the remote 16 address in it. We also know that's the same thing for the first one here. So look, let's perhaps have our original switch in here and call it. We'll just say it's payload. And we'll know it's the first payload array, and we have one that's called E242, and we'll say otherwise. We'll say that the top one is E242 other XB. We're going to have another graph. We'll only have the last 2 minutes. I'm not sure what they are, what comes out of this message. Deploy. Looks like it passes it straight through. Maybe. Let's see. It does. Ah, well, that's interesting. 2 series. Oh, we have all the data. That's interesting. We did initially. We have 2 series indicated. We won't anymore. We'll just have the 1 series of information. I think we've deployed that. Potentially we should see. Well, it's reasonably obvious, that one. Raw machine data, line chart 2. Let's see. Look at our dashboard. We've got 2. We're going to have 2 elements call the same things now. This switches between payloads. I'm clearly doing something wrong here. Perhaps that chart needs clearing. Ah, that's what the issue is. The chart is rather large. Yes, both the charts are still 13 by 13 or 13 deep. So let's change the size of the chart. Is it 30 by 5? Let's give that one. Can we write 30 by 5? I think we just have to say 30 by 5. I'm definitely going to change the size of the button. Let's give the button a default width of 3 by 1. And now we've finally got rid of the button that's the entire width, and it's moved up as well. So here we are with both of them displaying two bits of information, and that's because I'm guessing that they're both getting fed by the same one. Now this one seems to have stopped. Clearly something's not quite right, so let's see what a fix is. So clearly we've made a little bit of a mistake, and that's actually here in this message payload change. So the original payload was an array with 3 elements in, and because we're going to put them into this into our graphs, we actually simplified it. We lost the ID and we lost the time. So that went. How do we stop that happening? Well, there's a few things we can do. We can actually make sure that we actually save this information to a database at this point. We could even put it into the database at this point here when we have this publish message. If it could connect to the database, we could also actually put that information straight in there here. But let's see what the error was. So what we did was we got rid of the original payload and we just lost that information, so we just kept the data. That was it, because that's what we want to plot. Now, we didn't affect the topic, so this switch, what we talked about before, we maybe need to go back to the topic because that exists, but when we want to sort of see if in the topic there is something like has some sort of contents that sort of contains, well, that'll do. Otherwise, so that's simple as that. So we'll just swap it to the topic. It contains that, otherwise it does that. So now this switch will work. We'll now be able to switch by the data type. If we deploy that, we can also dump the data. So there's 2 things we can do. Let's make a new button. We'll call this one button 1. What will we do this one? This is going to be display or state. When click send payload, if a message arrives on input, emulate a button click. Well, we'll do. We'll leave that as that and see what happens. And call this one clear. And what does clear do? Well, clear. Okay, sorry. If we want to clear a data here, clear data. If we recall, it said we need to send an empty payload in. The label can also be set by message property. We'll do something like that. And what should we do here? This clear has got to inject, or it's got to actually do something. It's got to actually put an empty payload into this thing, so we might have to use a change node. We could possibly, can we say what it does? Label, if message arrives on input, emulate a button click. When click send, here we go, payload. Let's put the payload equal to be that. So when we click it, when that button is clicked, it clears the chart. Let's see if we've managed to do that. So we have this one with our raw data. Click on clear. It clears the chart completely. So it's starting not just completely from scratch with no data. Now I know there is when no data is available, we can show something, so why don't we do that rather than having it disappear completely. Blank label, no data. Maybe this will be a much more reasonable one to have in there, so we can see there's no data, that there is an area for data but none exists. That's not too bad. The bottom one down there should be working away as well. The lower one set on rather long time scale, so we want to change the time scale on that. Raw machine data. Why did that go to chart? Label. Okay. It's a line chart. Last 2 minutes. Last 2 minutes. That's what we want, really. Line chart, step 30 by 5. That's a bit better. So, raw data 1, raw machine data, group 1, 2 graphs. We can use a button. This one we haven't used as an indicator yet. We might as well do something with this and make it clear both the datas, clear both the chart datas, or clear the data on both charts. State button doesn't do much at the moment. Is it going to respond to the payload? We could have some text responding to it as well. Perhaps we should put the RFID reader payload here. I wonder if we can make use of this one. We're going to set the payload to payload 1. Let's make that the same. No, that if we do that, that will end up in the chart. We might have to switch that again, so let's see if we can do that. Let's add, if it contains E242, if it contains, no, the topics will be there. No, they won't, sorry. What am I talking about? We'll just do contains and we'll do the, I think it's 8 AAC, I think. And then we'll add an otherwise. And we'll assume that that's going to catch the 2 nodes that we know about, and the last one's going to be the text, and that will allow us to use the same switch to change the text to here, which is going to be the RFID reader. Deploy that. Let's see what it says. The text down here should change from that text value. We'll find out why it won't in a second, if it will or it won't. So we need a tag. It did, but look how different it is. So we've got text on the left hand side, and on the right hand side we've got the result. We've got, if we clear both of those graphs, you really ought to do something about the fact the text and that is separated by a mile, a country mile. So that would be, simply put, that the value format, instead of being label on the left and value on the right, has this format, or even label value with a layout like that. Let's look at that one. I don't normally use that one. It's done and deploy that. Let's look at the dashboard. So now we see, oh, it's actually centralized. Prefer it on the left hand side. Okay, how could we make it on the left? Well, possibly by using the spacer and putting that next to itself. If this has a certain width, how wide is that piece of text? We'll change its size to auto. We'll make it the same size as the button, maybe 4 by 2, and we'll maybe add, deploy that. We might end up having to put a spacer after state to pad it back to the left. Okay, what's it done here? It's actually, because it's narrower, it's actually sneaked up after the clear button. So even with this just brief example here, we're starting to see some of the limitations of having Node-RED manage the dashboard. If we have a simple dashboard design, we can potentially easily lay this out sort of vertically, but once we have something a little more complicated, that we have to remember why things are laid out the way they are.